It's time to get the inside info on BYU with Cougar insider Mitch Harper of KSLSports.com on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
And our BYU insider for KSLSports.com, Mitch Harper, standing by. Mitch, what's going on, man?
Hey, happy to be on, guys. How's it going?
Oh, phenomenal. Tell me, is it more fun to cover this basketball team right now, or is football always just the thing where you go, even like a spring preview, even like getting into the early rankings in football? Like, I know you well enough to know that all of it speaks to you, but what's more fun right now, thinking about the future of this football team or jumping in right now with what the basketball team is doing?
It's a good question, but I got to say the basketball probably has the edge because there's just so much potential for this team. To take a absolute haymaker from Arizona, their best stuff offensively, and shine in a tough spot late in game and making big shots as a collective team. I mean, guys, I've been watching BYU basketball for a long time. I don't recall many games where a BYU team is operating at a high level like that game against Arizona. Sure, there were games where, Jimmer's going off for big numbers individually, but, Arizona's a really good team. I think Arizona could be a Sweet 16 team, and BYU was going blow for blow and didn't look out of place. It wasn't a game where, that favored team was underperforming to what we typically know. They were both playing at a high level, and BYU won on the road. That was impressive stuff, and I think right now, the pulse of BYU sports is kind of at basketball, but, I mean, football is always, when you get out on the practice fields, it's always a fun time to get out there and see the guys, playing some football. But yeah, basketball, I think, has got the edge right now.
So JJ and I were having this discussion earlier this week, and I'll ask you because I mean, this basketball team's playing its best basketball right now. At this point last year, Mark Pope's final year, it was a team that was doing really, really well and was locked up, and we knew that they were going to go to the tournament. They were a high seed. They had a good high net ranking, but is this team better than last year's basketball team for BYU? Because it feels like right now they're kind of getting into a meshing situation that the team last year wasn't at this point. They were it seemed like they started to trend downward energy-wise. Is this a better basketball team this year than they were last year?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. This is a much better team, and a big reason for that is because of the play of Richie Saunders, who was on that team last year, but he's become a star, and I think there's got to be a real conversation about him being the Big 12 Player of the Year, at least in the mix, because, Houston's got a collective group of guys that are really good, but there's not one individual star.
Yeah.
Maybe you could point to Texas Tech's JT Toppin, but Saunders deserves real consideration for Player of the Year. This team's better, and the fact that they go, 10-11 deep, too, and they're still trending up. The offense is operating at such a high level. Now, defensively, like similar to last year, there's games where they've taken a step back, and against ASU to give up 81 on a team that was pretty much down to 5 guys in the final 13 minutes of action. I think that was a little bit underwhelming on that defensive end, but it's a pick your poison type of team. BYU is, and they can hit you in the post, they can knock down threes at a high clip, and they're efficient too. It's not just the sheer volume like last year. BYU is knocking down threes at around 48-50%. It seems like in these recent games. That's been really impressive to see, and they're just efficiency makes them a better team, and they've got more depth and top end talent as well.
Mitch, I remember back in December watching that game at Providence, and I got to be honest, I was watching that game thinking, man, this BYU team was not up to the hype. This team's not very good. Very young. This is going to take them a while to figure this out. And here we are in February. They're a top 25 team. They've won 5 in a row. And if they win at Ames next week, they legit could be top 4 and get the bye to the quarterfinals in the tournament. What has been the biggest change since that Providence loss to now that has helped this team get hot and reach their true potential?
the lineup change, going from Cannon Catchings to Mawit Mag at the 4. And honestly, I think the pro, that paired with the pro approach that Kevin Young takes, where it's a bottom line deal. You got to perform to continue earning your spot every single day. I think there's a clear communication every single day with how these guys, where they fit into game plans on any given night. And everyone stayed kind of locked in. And that locker room setting, you would think that, someone goes to the bench, they're going to maybe, there's going to be issues in the locker room if there's change up. That hasn't been the case at all with this team. And, they've all stayed ready for their moment when called upon. There's been inconsistent play from guys like Cannon Catchings, who goes for 14 against Arizona. Then he's got 0 against Arizona State. But I think that changed to go with a little bit more veteran experience in the starting 5 was the difference for BYU. And it's really changed everything. I mean, what Mag, going to him again, he was a 27% three-point shooter a season ago. His true shooting percentages were in the 40s. Now he's, one of the best true shooting percentages on the team. He's been excellent. He's one of the best knockdown corner three-point shooters on this team. And so there's been a lot of guys that have continued to get better over the course of conference play, but that lineup change in particular feels like where it all started to fall into place for BYU, and they've been taking off and really operating at a high level ever since.
What has Kevin Young figured out over the year? It's one thing to just be like, hey, he's a great basketball coach. I mean, he's just been doing something so different. And you talked about that pro approach to it, but he obviously, there was a learning curve for him, I think, as well, getting into the college game. What was it, and what do you think the thing was that he's figured out the most?
I think one of the big things was understanding, one, the college game and just the importance of, the metrics and the chase for the in-state tournament. He's got a support staff and assistant coaches like, Chris Burgess, who kind of keep him dialed in on that. But also just understanding maybe the tendencies of how games are called in the Big 12 and the style of play. And you got to be a little more physical, getting downhill and going to the rim. BYU early in Big 12 play was settling for a lot of outside shots, not getting downhill, not attacking the rim. And I think he's adjusted on the fly. And also I think he's been, willing to admit sometimes you got to make changes. And I think that's, sometimes with coaches, they're sometimes can get really stubborn and they're going to keep rolling with the same lineup. He's had a lot of lineup changes this season until he really found his sweet spot with this starting 5 that he currently has, as I know with Mawit Mag at the 4. And I just think that also, too, that, if something's not working, he will make that change, even in game. And I think that's been one of the things that's really helped this BYU team. But also, too, there was a little bit of a learning curve with how he coaches and teaches this group of players. I mean, he was working with the likes of Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal. He didn't have to go extensively into teaching them how to do something. For college guys, it took a longer, time to how to teach what he wants out of their offense, and it's really worked out quite well. And I still think there's potentially, another gear to this team. But I think what's optimistic for BYU is that they've shown enough that says they're not going to be, deer in the headlights look in a bracket on a Thursday afternoon in the in-state tournament. JJ and I were there last year, and everyone around BYU just seemed tense, even though they were a really good team, but it felt like they weren't ready for the moment. And I feel like this group, it doesn't matter the stage, they're ready for it. And that's kind of how Kevin Young's instilled the mindset into them. So that, who knows if that leads to actual wins in March, but they seem better equipped to handle the pressures that come with actually getting into a bracket when that day comes.
You look at bracketology, there's a lot of them out there based on Lenardi's. He's got them at an 8 right now. And you look at their schedule plus what they could do in the Big 12 tournament, Mitch, what do you think their ceiling is as far as the seed goes? How high could they climb?
I think that the ceiling could potentially be a 6. If they win at Iowa State, that's a seed mover because Iowa State's projected as a 3 seed in many of the bracketology forecasts right now. That could really bump BYU up. But it's really going to be interesting to see how the committee where they place BYU in the bracket. And we know last year it impacted the no Sunday play impacted their seed where they were on the seed S curve or whatever they call it, the seed lines, a 5 seed. They dropped to a 6, and that prevented them from going to Salt Lake City because of the no Sunday play. How will it work this go around? Will that affect the seed line or maybe force them to be in a quadrant with a Big 12 team? Many of the bracketologists you look at right now, they've got BYU, lining up against either New Mexico or Gonzaga or even Utah State. But then in that same quadrant, and as an 8-9, you got Houston potentially in the round of 32, which goes against bracketing principles. But because of BYU's no Sunday play, they might have to ease up on that and slide them into a spot where maybe in the round of 32 you're facing the team that knocked you off by 30-plus in January. So that's one of the tricky things about BYU and their no Sunday play. It almost shrinks their pool of possible landing spots because they're in a league that has maybe 7-8 bids. That shrinks their spots even more than when they were in the WAC or the Mountain West Conference and the WCC. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I mean, I always kind of look at it and think if the bracketologists are forecasting an 8, probably slide them to a 9 or a 10 maybe, because it seems to always be maybe one side seed line lower than what you think because of that no Sunday play.
Mitch Harper, BYU Insider, KSLSports.com is where you can find his byline, and he, of course, hosts Cougar Sports Saturday. He and Matt Baiamonte did a phenomenal job covering this team. So West Virginia at home, they beat the Mountaineers at Morgantown earlier this month, and that was a massive one for them because it was a quad 1 road win. And then West Virginia's just been playing good basketball. What do they expect out of this one at home at the Marriott Center with West Virginia coming in?
Two contrasting styles. I mean, West Virginia is one of the more slower-paced teams. They'd like to get this thing in the 60s ideally, and BYU, of course, they're flying high, 80s, 90s. BYU wants to get into that space. So it's a clash of different styles. I think BYU's got the upper hand, again, because of their depth. I think it's been a real, significant piece to BYU's success where a lot of teams maybe are in the dog days of conference play. They're kind of worn down before you get to the conference tournaments. BYU's team's pretty fresh. You're not seeing excessive usage on guys. Yes, Richie Saunders is playing 30-plus minutes every single night, but everyone else, it's, in that 25 to 29-minute range. That's pretty light usage compared to what you see for a lot of teams. They're going with 7- and 8-man rotations. West Virginia's got a star guard in Javon Small, who, we talked about the Big 12 Player of the Year candidates. He's definitely in that conversation too. And, he only had 8 points against BYU in the first meeting a couple weeks ago. It was only held to 1 field goal attempt in the second half. I look for him to be a lot more active against BYU this second go-round. West Virginia is an NCAA tournament team, so this is a good matchup and another good opportunity for BYU not to necessarily build and improve their seed line potentially, but just get another quality win and avoid a home loss because you don't want to have any of those setbacks at home to potentially give you any sort of damage a little bit. BYU's comfortably in the field, but just don't want to damage their seed line potential with a home loss.
Switching gears to football, spring football now underway for the Cougars. What are some of the top storylines you're following with BYU during spring practices?
Definitely the quarterback position at backup, and to a lesser extent starter with Jake Retzlaff. But I just don't know how much Jake Retzlaff can really improve from this spring where he's not getting pressed. He kind of is who he is. Or I don't think the improvement for Jake is going to be visible in the fall in games to see how much of a growth he takes to become like a Zach Wilson or a Jaron Hall in terms of taking care of the football and not coughing it up. I mean, 12 interceptions last year. That was tied for the most in the Big 12. He's got to get that number down, but we're not going to learn that in spring ball. So it then puts the spotlight on McKay Hillstead and Trayson Bourget, 2 quarterbacks who were part of the program last year. This is the first full off season for McKay Hillstead. And one thing that was clear yesterday in the media observation windows, McKay Hillstead, he likes to run. And it was a reminder of his talent when he was at Skyridge High School and in some of his starts at Utah State. really good athlete. And he kind of fits the skill set of what BYU quarterbacks tend to be with Aaron Roderick. Dual threat guy, good athlete, good arm that likes to look downfield. We didn't really see many shots down the field from BYU's offense. If you were to size up a quick snapshot of who maybe won during the media period, it was definitely the defense yesterday. They pretty much limited everything that the offense was throwing at them yesterday. But that quarterback spot's going to be really interesting. And then I think, some of the defensive line spots are going to be really fascinating, particularly with Keanu Tanavasa anchoring this defensive line. He's the star, the face of the defensive line. I mean, Jay Hill's put it out there already. He feels he could be the best defensive tackle in college football this year. And in an era where it's NIL and money is a lot of commitment financially to a player, why not have those high, expectations? And, Keanu Tanavasa was, of course, with the first-team defense yesterday at defensive tackle. Alongside him was John Talmoipeu, was a guy that was kind of an under-the-radar guy last year, had some big plays against Baylor. I think he's going to be much improved, and wouldn't be surprised if he's potentially a starter in week one this season. He was on the first team yesterday. They've got some talented, players on that edge though, as well, with Tausili Akana coming in from Texas, and then Hunter Clegg, the former Utah signee out of American Fork. He's also part of the program too. And then you've seen some growth from the redshirt freshmen like Akini Laufonahema from Springville High School. He's added a lot of weight to his frame. He's now up to 240. He came to BYU last year at 210. He's added some good weight and still looks like he's pretty fast off the edge with that first step. And then Ephraim Asiata, still kind of light physically. He's still about 215. Ephraim Asiata is out of Harriman. But, they've got some intriguing options. And, again, I think the defensive line, a lot of new faces, but I think the ceiling and the potential could be higher with this group than the one last year that was a veteran-laden group. But I think you kind of knew who they were, and they were solid. But I think there's more high-end potential out of these guys along the defensive line. So those are the two spots that I think are really the most interesting. Cornerback as well. The first-team grouping at cornerback yesterday was Trey Alexander, Maury Bamba, and then at the nickel spot, Jonathan Cabella. He looks to be the guy that could have the first crack at being the replacement to Jacob Robinson next season.
Mitch Harper, you can read all the things that he's been talking about with the updates to camp and everything at KSLSports.com and get your vibe on BYU football and basketball. Of course, Mitch, before I get you out of here, when you see all these other programs are like shutting it down and going, we're not doing a spring game anymore. BYU's been way ahead of the curve on that. They've not cared to have like a legit spring game in a long time.
Let our old heads play flag football.
I know, they're like, oh, we were just ahead of the curve. We weren't just trying to like keep the media out. No, it was that we were trying to be ahead of the curve. What is that? What is that trend in college football? Why is it that these teams are going? Is it just the injury situation, or why is it that they're like, let's not focus on these spring games anymore?
I asked Kalani about that, and he noted that it's, fear of the transfer portal, I think, for some coaches. I referenced the Matt Rule commentary from Nebraska's head coach to Kalani, and he did point that out. And I think a lot of that kind of stems from, year one under Coach Prime. Remember, Colorado had that nationally televised game on ESPN, and then many of those guys bolted and left right after that spring game because they had some big performances. I remember some of the wide receivers. And then that narrative kind of started to build from that moment within college football in these spring games. And, I mean, I get it. It's these spring games are really they've been scaled back so much. And, I heard you guys yesterday talking about, that spring game in 2011 when I was driving over to practice. And I remember that, BYU, when they actually used to lay it all on the line, and it actually felt like a game.
Yeah.
It hasn't been that way in years. So it's like, if you're just going to chalk it up to a practice, fine by me. That's okay. I wish that they would give the fans a little bit of a glimpse to see something, just to get a chance, because I think that you're now getting in this world where BYU's still, cheaper than most places, but still, for some fans that might not be able to afford the fall experience at LaVell Stadium, give them a chance to go to the stadium and see the current team, in the spring for free or whatever it may be, cost $5. I don't know what you charge, but give them a chance to see the game. I think that's kind of a missed opportunity, but they are going to have an alumni game, and that's been kind of a fun event, I guess you could say. But, I think that, we're seeing a shift from spring football. Maybe it goes to, OTA events. We'll see what it ends up being. But, it's definitely a different feel and a different approach. And you saw it yesterday with some of the practice. A lot of the key guys were held off to the side, Isaiah Glasker and some of the players like that. So it's a developmental time, round out your depth, be able to identify young guys that could have a chance that maybe if you have to turn to them and dig into that depth, you believe that they could contribute in the games. That's really one of the key pieces to what spring football can provide.
Mitch Harper, BYU Insider, KSLSports.com. Cougar Sports Saturday host on KSL News Radio from noon to 3 every Saturday as well with Matt Baiamonte. BYU versus West Virginia tomorrow. Of course, we'll have a preview of all that and many of the things we've been chatting about here. Mitch, awesome job as usual, man. We'll chat with you again.
I appreciate you guys. Take care.
There you go, Mitch Harper. One of my favorite people on the planet.